As a private sector, yes, our working capital costs are huge at this point, probably not sustainable, but we have to stomach and go through. So in any good business, right, you always know there is going to be a rainy day. So you have to have plans for that. You can't just put your hand up now and say it's all the fault of the government and therefore we are perishing.
I think we shouldn't grumble all the time as a private sector. We have to take the pain. Now what has happened, that has happened and is unavoidable. But going forward, I think the key principle is to be proactive with working with the government and policymakers to get out of the situation we got into, I think.
So the government should look at reforming public sector. When I say public sector, I'm not talking SOEs. I'm talking of the public service, means the departments like the pensions department, the inland department, the customs, the railways. Those are the departments that service the people. I'm not talking of the business ventures. So I think the government must look at pruning down public expenditure. I know, having said that, it's not easy. You can't do it overnight. That reform will take, like the tax reform, 3-4 year process, because you can't put the public servants or the military on the road the following next day. So you need to reform that over a period of time. So there must be positive steps taken towards that.
The private sector vision and role in the economy. Hello, you're with Echelon's Rocketship Experience, and in the studio with us we have the leadership team from the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. We have Vish Govindasamy, who is the Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. We have Duminda Hulangamuwa, who is the Vice Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and Krishan, Balendra, who is the Deputy Vice Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Gentlemen, welcome to this discussion. Let me start with you, Vish. Sri Lanka is in an unprecedented crisis. The path out of this is kind of defined, but there are lots of uncertainties about our ability to get to that path. If you step back and look at the role of the private sector, particularly in this time of crisis, how would you say the role is impacted now, and how should the private sector view this?
Okay, thanks Shamindra for having us on this show. And I've said this repeatedly, it is more than just the private sector. I think every citizen of Sri Lanka needs to say Sri Lanka first. We all have our own individual issues because of the economic crisis, because of what's going on here, but we need to put aside all those things and say Sri Lanka first. So the private sector has already come forward and said that reform is the only way, right? Sri Lanka needs to reform not only in the state-owned enterprises, but many things, how we operate, how we think, how we go forward, how our monetary situation should look like. So we have participated in many engagements in articulating how Sri Lanka should go forward in getting through this crisis. To simply say it, I think we have had the surgery, right? We shouldn't let the patient die, right? There is enough antibiotics available for us. We need to take the hard pill, right? Swallow the hard pill and make sure we get through this most difficult time. I think the next 6 to 18 months are going to be extremely crucial on how every private citizen, every private sector person behaves and does is going to matter on how we are going to get through this.
So Duminda, I'll bring you in on the same question. Vish suggests the surgery is done, but there is a long road to recovery. What does, from a private sector point of view, what does that mean to you?
Well, it means a lot from what you said. You see, in my view, the reform process is very costly and time consuming. The reforms that are announced thus far are largely to do with taxation and interest rates. Taxation, as you know, has been increased substantially.
Sure.
At least proposed have been increased substantially, and it is been increased across the board for all sectors without exception. For individuals, it has gone up significantly higher than what it is now. And it is very painful. But as Vish said, we have to all look at this problem as Sri Lankans and see how we can overcome this. Because I don't think any outsider can solve the problem for us. It is we who will solve the problem, whether it's the corporate sector or the citizen. The past, so many things have happened. I mean, we can go back in history 50 years, 100 years and put the blame on A, B, and C and say, okay, financial mismanagement during A's time, B's time, C's time it happened. But the fact remains that we are in problem, so we have to come out of it. So, I think the corporate sector must understand beyond what is in it for us and see how we can go through these difficult times. It may be a year or two. With this taxation, interest rates are high, SMEs are unable to borrow, some of the SMEs might even close down, but that is a cost that we have to pay in my view. I mean, not that I am saying it should be that way, but that will be the eventuality. But I think until such time we overcome this crisis, it will happen. So that will result in poverty levels going up, people's affordability to consume will come down. So I think those things might happen unless we are patient and we wait. So if we go through the reform process without disturbing the system, without politically destabilizing it, our politicians, our ministers, our cabinets don't destabilize it, opposition party don't destabilize it. So all have a responsibility to make sure that the steps taken by the government, central bank, we see this thing through, and hopefully if the IMF deal comes through, and that has to happen in my paramount for everything, and then once that happens, probably will be more acceptable to the world community as is. Sure. So that we have to go through that process.
Sure. So, Krishan, also the Chamber is Sri Lanka's most influential business lobby. So, sure, you will ask your members and the private sector in general, hey, this taxation is something we have to live with for the time being. But take a slightly wider view also. You know, in terms of principles of how the private, what are those principles you think the private sector should stick by, in addition to accepting that taxation will be higher for several years?
I think it's asking for consistent policy, not just tax policy.
Sure.
I think we shouldn't grumble all the time as a private sector. We have to take the pain. Now what has happened, that has happened and is unavoidable. But going forward, I think the key principle is to be proactive with working with the government and policymakers to get out of the situation we've got into. I think collectively we've all played some part in getting into this situation. Now we need to work together to get out of it. And that means tightening our belts. It means focusing on costs in our businesses. And it also means engaging with our partners overseas to rebuild confidence in the country. And I'll just take one example as the tourism sector. With all the bad publicity the country got through this crisis mid this year, the tourism recovery has been quite slow. Of course, it will recover with time. But as a private sector that is into tourism, I think we need to work overtime on rebuilding confidence with the tour operator partners to ensure that the industry recovers. And that will apply to many other businesses that have foreign partners, whether it's export companies, others who represent foreign consumer companies in the country. Focus on engaging with partners to restore confidence in the country.
Wish the private sector, Ceylon Chamber included, have always been demanding a stable policy framework that ranked often in every survey of the private sector as potentially the most uncertain thing that private sector would like addressed. Now we are in a crisis. How realistic is that we can have stable policy. What does stable policy mean in a crisis like that? Is this the crisis policy we are referring to, or is it wider public policy that we should be addressing at this time?
I think it's a mix of both. I don't think we can have one at this time, but as a chamber, as a large corporate bodies, what we would like to see is a level playing field. Right? Everybody is treated the same way. I mean, that's where it should start, right? And we have never in the last 25 years had a level playing field. So I think that's the base. We need to establish that. And during this crisis time, right, whoever is in the government or whoever is in charge of our monetary policy, etc., will have to tweak here and there to make sure we get through this period of time. For example, we all know this current interest regime is not sustainable, right? But it has to be done, because if not, we will have an inflation that will go through the roof. It's already through the roof. Can you imagine if it's not done? So as a private sector, yes, our working capital costs are huge at this point, probably not sustainable, but we have to stomach and go through. So in any good business, right, you always know there is going to be a rainy day. So you have to have plans for that. You can't just put your hand up now and say it's all the fault of the government and therefore we are perishing. Like Krishan very correctly said, we are all equally responsible for what has taken place. So we can't just, if you point one finger, there's two pointing at you. So that's so for me, accountability, level playing field, transparency are the minimum that we can expect.
What does a level playing field mean? Are you referring to policy across industries, or is that a wider concept in your view?
I think it's a wider concept. I mean, every citizen like to be treated equally, right? So no one should be favored against another. That's what I mean. So, I mean, like, we are going to go through some reforms. In these reforms, things must be, put in a equal platform.
We've seen, I'm not asking you this because you're the accountant on the panel, Duminda, but we've seen changes to Sri Lanka's tax laws. If you take a chamber point of view, have they gone towards establishing a level playing field, or have they made the environment more uneven?
Well, now it's even, because it's 30% for all.
Okay.
But then earlier there were concessionaries, etc. You can't, you see, in an economy, we went to 30% today, probably because we have a huge financial crisis on our hand, huge balance of payment deficits. But in a situation where we were growing, the government had to use taxation as a tool to encourage investments into certain sectors, to encourage foreign investments, to develop certain industries. They use tax as a tool. So there can be arguments for and against that. Some might say, okay, taxation should not be used as a tool for development and growth because you pay tax on a profit, and therefore taxation should be neutral to everyone. Other school of thought is no taxation also. You see, in Sri Lanka, the issue is when someone is evaluating Sri Lanka as a destination for investment, you tick the boxes, right? So when it comes to other aspects like policy consistency, cost of electricity, availability of electricity, labor laws, land laws, all those things are not consistent, right? Today you say you're giving the port to one, next day you change it to someone else. So those are the inconsistencies we have. So when you tick the box in all that, taxation would rank number one, because we can't deliver a promise other than that. So that's why taxation probably was used as a tool to attract investments. But if rest of it is good, all the indices are good, you can tick the box, maybe taxation not a tool to use. So it all depends on at which time of the year, which time of the decade, which time of the period looking at taxation. So
you're suggesting taxation shouldn't be picking winners, basically?
I think so. It should not be.
Is that a broad policy that you have agreement on? I mean, it is not a function, or it is not a change that should affect the immediate crisis. But should we have a tax policy that is not picking winners?
It's difficult.
Essentially,
yeah. So I wouldn't say
it's not sustainable. Let's put it that way, right? And like we have found out, right now there are investors who came because of a low-cost regime. So now we have put them in trouble. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's why I think it shouldn't be the only attraction in town. There should be much more than that. Sri Lanka has to be, much more than just a low taxed haven to come and invest. It should be because of our people, educated people, right? Because the natural resource we have, many different things. It can't be just that.
Yeah. So if there's so if the rest of the indexes are not in the top box, right? Then we have to push something up to get the people to come here.
Sure.
Right. So then taxation is the tool only that we use. So you can argue for and against this, right?
Okay.
So it's one theory against other theory. But I think there may be situations in which you may have to. For example, if you take the port city, they are saying, okay, if you don't give, we're not going to invest. So then what do you do? Are we going to keep it closed, or are you going to... So it all depends on how you look at each investment and situation. So it's difficult to say, okay, this is the policy forever.
Just for clarity, the Port City Economic Council is not impacted by these tax changes, right?
It's not impacted, but there's a government policy that there will be any more tax exemptions or concessions to anyone coming new. So any new investment
But
will
it
not attract.
probably won't impact the concession already given.
Yes, what is already given will be remaining,
Yeah.
but Port City does not have anything at the moment. So they are unable to give anything new.
But under the original Port City concession, you can...
No, see, the Port City company has a SDP agreement.
Okay.
So they are not taxable. Sure. But anyone come develop there will be taxable.
At the same
as
rates
of today.
As of today.
As of today.
Right. The Port City law does not supersede the budget as a tax law.
No, there is... The Port City Act has provision to gazette tax concessions, which the government is not giving any concession at the moment because of the IMF discussions.
Sure.
So you can take something, a country like UAE, right, where people go there for a low tax regime.
Low income tax regime.
Yeah, and even low corporate or zero corporate tax. But then you look at all the levies and the fees. If you add up all that, you are actually paying a tax. So you see, it's a indirect way of again raising revenue. So, but it's the myth that it's a low tax, low cost, etc.
So we've started this reform agenda, Krishan, with taxation. I suppose that was the obvious place to start, given that we have to strike a deal with the creditors and the IMF also. But when you sort of look beyond what we can achieve with taxation towards solving this crisis, what do you think are the next steps? We've talked about reform broadly. What are the next steps Sri Lanka has?
I think, there's enough talk now about SOE reform and tax reform and all that. But one thing where we have not done well and failed in the past is to develop a medium-term policy for a few industries where Sri Lanka possibly has a comparative advantage. So I guess that is also a reform because we haven't done it well in the past. So pick 2 or 3, whatever it is, maybe 2 industries in manufacturing, maybe a service industry, and develop a medium-term policy because we think Sri Lanka can do well in an Asian context. And then have a consistent long-term policy, whether it's taxes or other incentives or government facilitation through a one-stop shop, so that we see through the implementation of that policy for those chosen industries. We really have not picked any industry and developed a policy and seen it through.
I'll come to the two of you also. If we are looking at the broader agenda for reform, we've started with taxation. Where do we move from here? SOE, but that's a broad way of describing a challenge.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So I think you see this taxation can't be the only reform to come out of the crisis. It's only one area. Why do you collect taxes? Is to increase government revenue to meet expenditure. So the government should look at reforming public sector. When I say public sector, I'm not talking SOEs. I'm talking of the public service, means the departments like the pensions department, the inland department, the customs, the railways. Those are the departments that service the people. I'm not talking of the business ventures, where we spend about $1 trillion a year in terms of salaries. That include project council, price, about all those people, right? So I think the government must look at pruning down public expenditure. I know, having said that, it's not easy, not that overnight. That reform will take, like the tax reform, 3-4 year process, because you can't put the public servants or the military on the road the following next day. So you need to reform that over a period of time. So there must be positive steps taken towards that. At least stop recruitment to government service.
Which has already been done.
Which has already been done, which is a good thing. In my view, reduce whatever the political parties say, the Paraya Sabha layers are too much. I don't think we need so many Paraya Sabhas around this country. The provincial council layers are too high. So I think the provincial councils consume about 1/3 of our salary cost. So we need to look at that whole administration system, whether we need such a big governance structure for a country like Sri Lanka. So although our government expenditure is about 20% of GDP is in line with international standards, but do we need that kind of expenditure is the question. So unless you reform the public sector, the need for cash from the private sector of high taxes will continue. So we need to look at how to pull down that cost. And also, it's important to get the debt sustainable, because we pay about 2 trillion a year on debt, which is double of salaries. Salary 1 trillion is about 2 trillion. So we need to see how we can prune that 2 trillion down. That can happen only if you get some kind of concession from the creditors and defer the payment. I know the interest will be deferred, but some deferment is required. Otherwise, this taxation is not adequate to meet that expenditure.
Sure. So Vish, this is a criticism also of the budget that has just been passed for 2023, that it does impose higher taxes, but it hasn't done enough to curtail the expenditure. What's the Chamber's view on the budget?
So yeah, we have already made that comment where we think that we don't see enough on the expenditure side. Adding on to what Duminda said, reforming public sector is now that we have to do, but we also have to ask why we got there. Now, if you look at any one of our members of parliament on the public day, one of the jobs that they do is sign off on letters of giving jobs. That's where we got to, from a 700,000 public sector to 1.5 million people. Right? It's self-inflicted.
Sure.
Right? So these are not people who are actually needed to provide the service to get Sri Lanka from A to B. So we are overloaded, front-loaded, and now we are trying to reduce, and we are saying, we'll give you 5 years of leave, go overseas and work, etc. So fundamentally, that needs to change.
But do you feel we have enough ideas on the table about how we can change that?
So we are asking the government
Right.
on some of these things. And the other thing is freebies. Right? We have for years on gotten up on stages and winning votes by saying, I will give you this, I will give you this for free, I'll give you 2 bags of this, etc. That needs to change. We need to have a fundamental change in our election commission, or how we do elections, where politicians are not allowed to get up on a stage and make promises at the expense of the state coffers. That is what has got us here. So those expenditures now is not going to be very easy to change overnight, because that's going to make X, Y, and Z very unpopular.
How does one get around to tackling the public sector, the sheer numbers of the public sector that we had? Like Vish pointed out, Krishan, over the last decade or so, we have essentially doubled the employment in the public sector with no perceived increase in service quality to citizens. How do we start this? If you had a chamber policy about this, how do you get about that?
I think there'll be some degree of natural attrition, because as long as we are where we are with the number of public service people we have, but if you don't adjust their compensation to keep in line with inflation, because we simply can't afford to do that, then there will be attrition in that they will move into other sectors, they'll move into the private sector, or they may even immigrate and look for opportunities. So that is one that likely development, and the natural attrition. And then other sectors, divisions like Sri Lankan Airlines, Electricity Board, which are always talked about, Petroleum Corporation. You have to find a way. It could be a VRS. We've done that before. some kind of VRS where you encourage people to find alternative employment.
And for reforms such as these to be done, the government will have to not only be firm, but it will have to have stability on its side, right? That is fairly uncertain given the structure of government currently. The president is from a party which has only one seat in parliament. What is your view about how government is structured, and should Sri Lanka go for elections to have more stability and clarity? What is the approach likely to be?
You see, I think given the complexity of our electoral system, stability in parliament will be a question always.
Right.
For example, if you take currently we had a government with 2/3 majority.
Sure.
And a president with a 6.9 million. Now, if that could be shaken, I don't know what else cannot be. So I don't think we can look for a situation where we will have all 225 sitting on one side. But more than the parliamentarians, Shamindra, people must be prepared for change. And I think today, so with parliamentarians speak the people's voice. So today, in my view, people are prepared for change. Those who pay 108 rupees per litre for petrol now are paying 374 rupees for petrol. Same goes everything else in. So I'm not saying they're enjoying it, it's happening. So when people are prepared for change, the politicians will agree to that. So in my view, now is the best time, because if president is a one party, the parliament belongs to the other party, so you have fair amount of acceptance. And I think given the situation, if the people are prepared to accept change, if the message is taken to people correctly and told this is why you are doing this, I think the parliament will accept it.
I think people also will dictate. It's not, I think the era of the political parties or members going and telling the people, this is what I'm going to do and you do this, I think they call it bluff. Right? I think this time around, it's going to change. People will come out and make their voice heard. And this is what you will do. If we vote for you, we are going to expect X, Y, and Z from you. And I think that's going to get more and more said. And especially, I think the young politicians who are there and probably will be able to listen to that and react to that type of demand, and will start working with them. So we already see that young political climate happening, who have been able to come out and make some changes that has been made already. So I think the whole climate is changing.
Would you want to see more unity in policy making in the parliament? Because I mean, if you look at the budget, there was a significant opposition in its second reading, although it has been now approved. So that alignment on the big issues seems to be lacking in parliament.
I know it's new. If you look at the budgets for the last 50 years,
this
will always be the same.
Condition is
yes,
one that is quite different.
Politics is politics in this country, right? So, whilst they agree privately to what the government is doing, openly they don't want to lose the constituency. They think there's a constituency waiting to elect them. But I think, in my view, the opposition political parties may be in favor of the reforms, because dirty work is done by someone else. So it's someone will do for them by the time they come. So I don't think, given the opportunity, they all have to do the same thing. I don't think there is a path outside. I don't know, first we have to decide whether there's a path outside this.
When we have asked that difficult question from the different segments of the political parties, do you have anything different to offer? Right? And we haven't got an amazing answer saying that here's our plan. Right? They silently also agree there's nothing more to do than to do this.
Do you think it's the chamber's role, or does the chamber, you're not a voting citizen, businesses are not voting citizens, you don't have a stake in that, right? Should businesses still, at this time, business leaders, not just the chamber, be calling for a common minimum program of reforms?
We have already done. That's something that we repeatedly said. Let's agree on a common minimum program, irrelevant of which party, which creed, where you come from, because that's what's going to get Sri Lanka out of where we are.
How well do you think that has gone down? Not in terms of people's immediate reaction to it, but are Sri Lanka's politicians, you think, willing to look beyond?
I think they have. If you look at, for the reasons that Duminda said, if you look at some of our utility prices, right, there was no serious disagreement on the utility prices being taken up because they knew that's the only way to survive. I mean, they saw the queues and they didn't have any answer better than increasing the price of fuel for the real price that one was importing and selling. So, just subsidizing that was not an answer. It doesn't matter which party you're from, eventually that worked, right? So, I think those are the things that we have been able to articulate as corporate citizens had said, agree to some of these easy wins.
So, Shamendra, to extend what Vish said, the Ceylon Chamber, the business community is a voting party. In my view, we carry substantial influence, I believe, amongst the political parties and the people.
Sure.
The role that the three of us played in the last 6 months was, we spent more time probably in the chamber than our own offices, right? The amount of discussions, negotiations we had with political parties being in alignment on key issues, more than economy at the time of the struggle. And then also to make sure that it doesn't happen again. The amount of discussions, alignment, tests are done was enormous. And I think that has proved and brought results, is my view.
Although we don't see that in public,
that's right.
You don't see that in parliament,
right.
that people, the parties are reaching across the aisle. Do you think that beyond the political sphere, that the agreement is there, that Sri Lanka, on the types of reform Sri Lanka needs?
I think there's no disagreement, for example, on the SOE reforms.
Right.
They all know whether it's, like he said, it's better that somebody else has got the monkey on the shoulder, right, rather than them, because they know it has to be done. Right. So I don't think there's massive disagreement on some of those things.
You can see from the general reaction what we spoke of, you would have normally seen so much resistance if you doubled electricity prices. And today, public are blaming these institutions for the high prices that they have had to pay. So as a result, it's going to be easier to push through the reform. I think the risk is going to be our short memories, because now each month appears to be more stable than the previous month. Will we forget what happened in mid this year? I think the silver lining of what happened and of hitting rock bottom is that we have an opportunity to reform. But it's important that whether it's the chambers, the private sector, other organizations, to keep reminding the people that it could get worse, that just because things are a little stable doesn't mean that the problems are behind us. We have to stick to the reform agenda.
So that is both an opportunity and a huge risk here, that our short memories will unwind the potential opportunity that we have in driving this reform agenda, right? This is not something businesses can necessarily sort of keep in the forefront of people's minds about the risks they face. What should businesses do? How are you approaching that?
We have to look after our employees right now. Corporates are struggling to make sure how we just get through this time for our employees, right? So I think many of us are speaking to the employees of the same voice that we are speaking, right? And explaining to them that this is a challenging time and we need to get through this. And they will have to make individual sacrifices too. Just like, the country is going to have to make sacrifices to get through this. So that's one way of, getting through to the masses, because each and every one of our employees and all of us combined probably have a very large employment base.
And also, we have to keep reminding government and opposition about the need for reform.
Sure.
Before they forget, like Krishan says. So we are in constant dialogue with them. We have some of our past chairmen sitting on reform committees, PPP, etc. And then, so we engage all of them quite a lot. And so Chamber plays quite a pivotal role in that respect, in trying to get the reform agenda through. But, governments don't move very fast, right? So it's not easy. It's easier said than done. You need to get through the unions, you need to get to the parties. So all that has to be done. So it'll take time, but I think it should get done as soon as possible.
If we want more private capital to play a role where state has dominated, do you think there should be no-go areas, or should the utilities be left aside? Should the state banks be left aside? What are the opportunities for private capital? Is that and is there ideally a sequence of reforms that can come in the state sector?
I think the ones that they are picked for reform currently are probably the most easier and to get through without making drastic challenges, because you need to prove that this can be done.
Sure.
Right? So we have to allow that, and we have a very short window. It's not like we have 5 years to make these reforms to happen. We are talking about next 12 to 18 months if the ones that they have already selected. So that will give a demonstration of how to go forward. There are countries that have taken utilities private, right? If it can, so end of the day, as long as a good service, a reliable service can be afforded to the citizen, then why should it be done by the government? And also we cannot continue to think that we will have a class of people below certain levels. And we keep talking today about a vulnerable class, right? So are we going to always have a vulnerable class for the rest of our lives? We need to uplift those people, and we need to do lots of things. While these SOE reforms are happening, we need to see how we can bring the bottom up by affording different employment, digitization, something that we have not spoken about. That digitization plays a huge role in what we are going to do.
It's also a tough time to sort of sell assets, because prices potentially are more depressed now because of Sri Lanka's predicament, but also what's happening globally. Cost of capital is higher globally now than it has been in a decade or more, right? Should this temper our approach, or should we go forward regardless, do you think?
No, I think they should go for regardless, because if you wait for better times, we don't wait till it'll come. So I think, as Vish said, we must pick the easy ones first. Right. If you pick the difficult ones, we require law changes, etc. It'll take more time and run more in controversy. So I think we can pick the easier ones first. You're right, we have the best time, but I think we have to start with the easier ones. Otherwise, if you wait for the right time, it won't work.
You can't just look at the value you get for one particular divestment, because if you can get one or two divestments done quickly, the impact it will have on confidence, especially if a leading foreign company comes in here and invests. I think that you can't value that, but that could be many times the actual value of the transaction. And you have to always, in business, a basic principle is you have to meet the market. So if there is you have to give it to the best bid.
There shouldn't, I suppose, you don't anticipate that local investors be given preference or anything like that. This should be an open, competitive process.
It's been made very clear. The investments required is in US dollars. So whether it's private, local or overseas, what is required to bring in US dollars. So if you can bring it in US dollars, who cares?
I just want to ask you broadly about what the discussion is like at senior management in organizations. I'm not asking you to sort of delve deep down into the one that you're representing or you work for. But is this challenge appreciated, and the cost that it imposes appreciated by shareholders? Is there shareholders being, all of you come from organizations where you're familiar with how shareholders work, are they willing to step back for a couple of years over earnings and stuff like that?
The shareholders like these two companies.
Yes,
So it's like this: either you go through this pain and work towards a better firm, or you just perish, right? You can take the one end, it's just very broad two ends. There's no middle here. So we have to work towards looking at going forward. And I'm sure each of us, even in this difficult time, are not just waiting. We are looking to see if there are opportunities. And it could be in Sri Lanka or overseas, right? So we need to march forward. There is no looking back and saying, I'm going to stop here because everything is not towards me. So that's what I think, and I'm sure every boardroom is talking about that. What opportunity do we have even in this difficult time?
I think most investors and shareholders now, there are mix. If you take the listed companies, there are foreign institutions, there are local institutions. And I think the majority of the shareholders appreciate the challenges. Look, the country has been headline news all over the world for having hit rock bottom with the economy, right? So it's one of the worst performing economies. So I don't think there is a very high expectation. There is patience. Shareholders are not making unreasonable demands.
Sri Lanka's large companies, despite the challenges, have managed to keep ticking, because even if you have volume drops in business, potentially companies have adjusted prices and had still can maintain revenue or even show growth in revenue because of inflation, because of value. How do you make the case for people when there is no real pain on your side, right? How do you explain this, that your profitability is still reasonably there? You haven't seen a big, unless you're in travel and tourism, you haven't seen a big dip anywhere else.
I beg to differ, because I think the revenues have grown, but if you look at the margins, they have contracted seriously.
Okay.
From GP level to profit margins have seriously eroded in the last 1 year. And volume drops, like you said, is big. So it's not that, while you're showing growth numbers in revenues, there is a profit drop. So it's not like everything is hunky-dory and the companies are just cruising along.
If you take the banking sector, you can see the profits that are reported now as opposed to reported 2-3 years back. They're significantly eroded. The financial services, leasing companies, finance companies, that reflects general market condition, right? So they have all taken the hit. All companies, for example, the recent increase in taxes, I know most companies are trying to take the hit part of the tax hit. So like that, companies are responsible and trying to see how much they can absorb themselves. And I know a lot of companies who don't just increase prices because the exchange has gone up or the interest rates have gone up, cost of production has gone up. So I don't think companies have indiscriminately passed the buck to the people.
Even this new social security tax, part of the ruling is you can't pass it on to the consumer. So you immediately 2.5% on your top line you're absorbing.
As we close, I'd like for you to think about, as business leaders, what are the messages you have for the political leadership of this country and for the people of this country? Again, sure, you have a stake in the economy, without doubt, right? But again, you're not citizens. Businesses are not citizens. They don't have a vote, right? But you are outsized in your impact in the economy. What is the message that you would have for political leadership and for citizens of this country?
So I would say for citizens, including all of us, is that we have to realize that we are in a difficult situation. We must accept that and appreciate it. It's easier said than done to the man on the streets because they'll always come and say, we never manage the economy, we never have businesses, and therefore we are responsible for the current situation. Yes, that may be true, but what else do we do? So I think forgetting the people, so we had to look at the vulnerable sector, how to look after them. So there are people who can still afford to pay. So I think our fervent call is to everyone to pay their taxes rightly and correctly, to accept the current situation challenge, and to support the reform process, because if we don't do it now, no one else will do it for us, as I told you, and we have to do it ourselves.
And to the political leadership.
Number two, political leadership is to make sure that whatever they do it honestly, not for political reasons. The government should not do politics at the current moment of time, and neither should the opposition. So they must all unite on a common platform. We have been articulated, trying to push for a national policy. Difficult, but we are trying. But that is our mandate, is to make sure that the political parties don't make, if you go to parliament, if you listen to parliamentary debates, speeches, nothing on policy, right? It's all debating, trading arguments against each other. But what we tell them is that they must unite and they must give leadership to this. Otherwise, don't expect people to support you. People won't unite and support this if they don't give leadership to it.
Krishan.
I think it's about being patient, and I think we have to realize that the situation could get worse. We've had 1 year of 75% inflation. If we stick to these stabilization measures, inflation can come down to single digits again within 12 months. If we don't, and there are enough examples around the world of countries that have got into crisis, we can have another year of 70% inflation or higher, and yet another year after that. And this can be a spiral. So it's important to appreciate things can get worse and be patient. And if the political parties, there should be like a moratorium on political bickering. They must, because of the gravity of the situation. And we have to see through the stabilization measures and the reform measures that have to be taken.
Before I come to just what you said, we can either go the Lebanon route or the Georgia route.
Yes.
The choices we have. Sorry.
Yeah, so first to the politicians, declare your assets, show that you're above board, don't become a politician to create wealth, right? You're here as elected for the people, serve the people, that's why you're elected. So that's a fundamental change every politician needs to make. Still, I think 3/4 of the political members are not declaring their assets. So I think that's the first that they need to go forward and make a huge change.
Make the asset declarations public.
Public,
essentially.
yeah. So for the people, believe in Sri Lanka, right? Sri Lanka we can go forward. We have come through 30 years of civil war and we have survived, and we can survive this and support people at this each other during this difficult time.
Indulge me one last question again to all of you. If you could, if you had a magic wand, and you could change one thing, just like that, one thing only, what would that priority be right now? Reach across the aisle in Parliament over the reform agenda?
No, I think all citizens must think rationally.
Right.
As a country, first is what I would say.
Sure.
Agreed.
That is possibly the greatest danger Sri Lanka faces.
Yeah.
Fully endorse what he says, that we must appreciate the gravity of it. It's like Vietnam after the war. Look at how they've come out, because the entire population worked together to get the economy out of the mess that they were in. And look at what they've achieved over 20 years.
There's many examples. Look at Rwanda. Look at Georgia. I mean, we always keep talking about the worst examples, right? The ones that have perished. But I think there's lots of stories behind these successful countries. South Korea. Look where they are and where we are today. So it is because of the sheer hard work of those people who have got them to where they are.
On that note, Vish Govindasamy, Krishan Balendra, Duminda Hulangamuwa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean.